Welcome everyone. I'm Tyler Matthews. I'm the Executive Director for Venture Cafe St. Louis. So this is another episode of Venture Cafe Live where we are doing casual interviews that highlight different companies and organizations in the St. Louis area, the makers, the doers, the entrepreneurs that are making our region better. We interview whether they're locals, transplants, or expats. We just want to make sure that we're highlighting some of these cool projects that are happening, whether in the for nonprofit space, and not only get connections to those who are being inspired to become an entrepreneur, but also to lift up some of these projects that are happening and hear a little bit more from the makers and what they're doing to improve the St. Louis area. So the way this is going to work for all of those of you who are new is we're going to do the live stream today, the live stream on YouTube and on our website. And then for those of you who've signed up through the Venture Cafe website, we'll end the live stream and then we'll have some Q&A for those who have created an account. So without any further ado, I'm excited to have Akeem Shannon with us today. And he's going to tell us about Flipstik. He's also going to just share about, how it got started, and some of the tricks for, tricks or whatever you want to call them, to the hustle, the smarts he used to get to where he is, and hopefully share some insight on how that happens for you other inspiring entrepreneurs who are joining us. So Akeem, why don't you give us a quick pitch for Flipstik?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, Flipstik is a small device that goes on the back of your phone. And it functions as a kickstand. So you can prop up your phone, watch your favorite video, TV show, streaming, all that good stuff. But the magic really happens when you reveal our synthetic CT adhesive based off the foot of a gecko. Essentially, it lets you stick your phone to virtually any flat surface. So wood, glass, metal, concrete, brick, pretty much anywhere you can stick your phone, comes off with a twist, and you can wash it. So it's completely reusable, washable, so you can clean it over and over again, works for thousands of sticks. And that is Flipstik in a nutshell.
All right. So before we jump into some of the details behind the story, I got to ask so it's adhesive, but it can also be washed. Can you explain that part real quick? I'm too distracted by that.
Yes, that's a great question. So, back in the 70s, NASA had done a lot of research on what's called biomimicry. So basically technologies that were based off of natural biology. And one of those things was the feet of gecko. So on the bottom of a gecko's foot, they have hairs just like we do, but they're called CT hairs. And if you imagine a human hair, but on the end, instead of it coming to a tip, it splits into 100,000 additional hairs. And that's actually what lets it climb up different walls and surfaces. So essentially with our synthetic CT adhesive, we have a synthetic version of that same engineering system, that same biology-based system in our adhesive. And so there's no chemicals here, it's all friction. So that's how you're able to wash it, clean it, use it over and over, and it lasts for so long.
Got it. Okay. I was dying to know. That's pretty awesome. So actually it's a good segue into some of the history. So I've heard a cool background story to what's going on with how you started this. Please, I would love to hear how this came. This is kind of like one of those garage moments to where you're at today. So I'd love to hear a little bit background of how you got started.
Yeah, of course. So it all actually started with a 3 a.m. phone call where I was getting a phone call from my uncle, who's an engineer at NASA. And he typically calls late at night, and we're on the phone and we're talking about a project he's working on. And he's an electrical engineer, so he's not really into the chemistry, but he's telling me how he's going to use this adhesive that NASA had come up with in the 70s, for this project he was working on for all of his wiring to lay it flat behind his paneling. And as he's explaining to me kind of how it works, I'm thinking, I said, man, that TV that I just mounted on my wall that took me 3 days, it would have been a lot faster if I could just slap some tape on the back and stuck it up on the wall. And so while I realized that was probably going to be pretty impractical to do, the idea just stuck with me. And eventually I was like, well, a TV may not work, but a phone, we can make a phone work. And that's kind of where everything began. From there, I taught myself to write a patent, YouTube videos, a copyright through YouTube videos, and eventually found manufacturers in China. And we launched our Kickstarter a few months later in April of 2018.
Got it. And since then, you've gone, or actually recently, you were accepted, I believe, in the Arch Grants program. Had
Yes.
gone through some different pitching opportunities too, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about. But I love that it always seems like these ideas come from these impractical or bizarre discussions, you know. So you looking at a TV, maybe one day that can happen. I'm still a little concerned that it took you 3 days to get that thing on the wall, but
well, there's so let me explain, because I know there's some do-it-yourselfers who are like, wait, what a minute. So, you know, typically, you know, you mount it to a stud, but when I was using my stud finder, I'm going and I'm checking the studs, and it's just not right. I'm like, no, it should be spaced apart, like something is wrong. Turns out, instead of the studs being, you know, typical like vertical, the studs were horizontal in this wall. And so when I was like going back and forth, it wasn't showing anything, but I would go up and down and it would pop up, and I was like, something is not right here. But that was the issue. It was the studs were horizontal. So it's not that I had no idea what I was doing.
That is okay. That's a interesting backstory. I didn't even expect that. That's pretty funny, and you definitely get some grace on that one. And I mean, shoot, you've launched a successful company, so we know you've got the smarts. So that, you know, life was just throwing you a curveball there. Anyway, that's a funny side thing. But so tell us also a little bit about, okay, so I mentioned Arch Grants, mentioned just real quickly too, you've done a couple other pitches, and I loved, I think it was the one with Diddy. You found an unconventional way to get in access to him in that group. Can you share a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, it's just like the horizontal studs, right? You got to figure out a way to get in where you fit in. So in 2019, I had applied for Shark Tank, and I didn't make it onto the show. And I was just racking my brain at how we get, you know, our name and our brand out there. And so Diddy, Puff Daddy, was having a music conference that he has every year down in Atlanta for people who want to get into the industry. So I told myself, I was like, you know what? I'm pitching my business to Diddy. Like, I have to get it to him. And the pitch competition was closed. So what I did instead was I realized that they had a music competition. So I wrote a rap about Flipstik to pitch my business in the rap. And so I head down to Atlanta. I spent $500 on a VIP ticket to get in, and I go in to do my pitch, and I just rap the whole thing. And the judges, their minds were blown. They're just like, he just referenced his business. It's like, do it again, do it again. And so they just went crazy. And, you know, they gave me top marks, but then the people running the competition were like, well, he's not really an artist. We can't put him on stage with the other artists. I just don't know. We'll send him an email or something. But, you know, I couldn't stop there. So what I end up doing is I take my Flipstiks and I have the package, I hold it up in the middle of the comedy show. And one of the comics on stage sees it, and he's like, what are you trying to sell? And eventually, long story short, he invites me on the stage. I show everyone the Flipstik in the crowd. And eventually I get to wrap my pitch for my Flipstik during the comedy show at a music conference for Diddy. And so then everyone gets to see it, and I end up meeting his COO. AT&T was the sponsor of the event, so I got to meet some AT&T executives. And about less than 30 days after that, they were having the next event in LA, which was like the culminating event for the music conference. And Diddy, they bought thousands of dollars worth of product from me, invited me out there. And at this event, I knew there was going to be some even bigger celebrities now that they were, you know, back home in LA. And so I had made a custom Flipstik with Snoop Dogg's face on it. And so we're going through the motions. He's on stage, he's doing this thing, and they're like, one more question. And there's one person in front of me to ask the last question. So once again, I'm like, last ditch effort. I have to figure this out. So I literally just take my phone, there's a pillar, and just slap it on the pillar behind the person asking the question. And Snoop Dogg is just looking, and he's just like, this motherfucker just stuck his phone on the wall. On stage, stopped the whole show. And he's just turned, everyone's like, his phone is on the wall. And security's trying to haul me out. They're like, you can't ask a question. And Snoop Dogg's just like, no, I want to know about the sticky phone. Tell me about the sticky phone. So I get to go up, show Snoop Dogg. He falls in love with it. And actually, I think I have, let me see if I have it here. I think here it is. Here's actually, this is the one I made for Snoop. Put his logo. This is for a mobile game that he had out. And so he literally just freaks out over the sticky phone, go backstage and everything. So and in the crowd that day was a senior vice president for sales at AT&T because they were sponsoring the event, and obviously they just loved it. And so we've gotten a lot of inroads with them, and yeah, I mean it's this kind of goes to show you that sometimes if you were to write a plan out, it will make no sense, but sometimes you just got to go for things. And that was one of those situations where I just went for it, and it just snowballed and snowballed and continues to snowball into bigger things.
That's funny. Yeah, that would not be a very convincing business plan to go the route you did.
Not at all.
And which is why I guess a lot of times those are thrown out in the startup world. So I love that. It's funny too, because I've thought before, I'm like, how beneficial are some of these conferences and stuff that startups go to? It sounds like the one that you did, because of the way you went about it, ended up being, it sounds pretty successful from a sales standpoint.
Extremely. Yeah,
That's incredible.
absolutely. I mean, yeah, and that's the thing. It really is what you make of it, because that same year we went to CES, which should be tailor made for our type of product. But the benefits that we got out of this music conference versus CES are completely different, and and much more fruitful from this music conference. And I don't know if it's necessarily the conference you go to, or if it's just the attitude you go into it with. Because when I was going into Diddy's event, I was like, I'm gonna make this happen by any means necessary. Nothing is stopping me from getting this done. And I think truly that was the difference that played there.
So yeah, speak to that a little bit, because that's something that's hard. That's something that you can't learn in some sort of like academic setting around startups.
Yeah, true.
Can you share a little bit of what you've learned in that from that perspective of what it takes to be an entrepreneur, and does how does that move the ball down the court for you to where you are today? That, I mean, obviously we already saw some of the result of that, but can you speak to like the importance of that kind of that mentality a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the biggest thing for me to learn, and something that I didn't know. I don't think I fully understood early on. A book that I read, given to me by my last boss that I ever had, was called The Alchemist. And I don't know if anyone's read it, they kind of know where this is going, but it talks about understanding what it refers to in the book as omens. Some people refer to them signs, or intuition, whatever have you. It talks about following omens and going after your treasure or your dream, and not letting things stop you or block you or distract you from going after what it is you want to go after. And I think the first time I really realized that when you get to that point where it's like there's no way, and you reach that brick wall, that's always the moment when it's like, if you just climb over that brick wall or go under it or around it or whatever you have to do to get around this brick wall, the other side of that wall is where your next like plateau is going to be at. And I learned that we had just finished our Kickstarter. I didn't know what to do next, how to get the product out there, how to push it. And we had an opportunity to go into the Galleria Mall, and it's a kiosk in the holidays. And the rent was just sky high. And I was very nervous. I was like, man, if I put all this money into this rent for this kiosk and we don't sell any Flipstiks, we're gonna be out of business. And I literally just like battled with it over a few days. Like I had a complete meltdown. I was so terrified of like taking that step. But I pushed through it. We went into the mall, and in less than 2 months, we did like $35,000 in sales. And we were the most successful kiosk in the region. We were being asked by all these mall operators to open up an additional kiosk in their mall. And that was something that I was this close to not doing. And once that happened, that's when I realized, like, oh, wow, like when you get to that point, you got to take that leap of faith. And it's like you said, it's something you don't typically learn in a classroom. But if you listen to any successful entrepreneur or someone who's successful in anything for that matter, whether it's athletics, actors, musicians, you always the same story of like, I got to this moment where it was like, give up or push through. And it's always those who push through when most people would turn back are the ones that succeed.
Yeah. So what other, and this is your first real venture, right?
Yeah, this is my first one that actually made it past, I would say conception phase. There were some that I invested some money in, spent a couple months on, but no, this is the first like full throttle, venture, yeah.
Gotcha. So can you share too, I guess, for people that are either aspiring entrepreneurs or really, really early stage, what are some of the other lessons that you've learned through Flipstik, and maybe even from the other two or the other projects you've done? Um,
Hmm.
you mentioned grit. There's, or you didn't say grit, but that's essentially what you
Yeah.
have, and
Yep.
that ability to push
Yep.
through. What are some of the other what are those things that you've just learned when you look back? You're like, oh man, like I just learned a lesson right there. Like, what are some of those other things
Yeah.
that you've come across while building your company?
Yeah. The other big thing, focus. I feel like so many people who want to be entrepreneurs, especially early stage, they want to do every little thing. And they don't give it enough time to nurture one idea to make it successful before they're trying to branch out to do other things and more and other things. And so I would say for me, the biggest thing was focus. I remember we finished our Kickstarter and my aunt, the wife to my uncle's engineer at NASA, and I love her, but she was like, well, no, now you got to come up with the next thing. That was like her response. You got to come up with the next thing. And I was like, no, I have to focus on this thing. And I think for a lot of people, that's what happens. They want to come up with the next thing and they want to branch into this if it's not an instant success. And I think, unfortunately, with the way, the media and everything works, we only hear about the stories that seem like overnight successes. Everything seems like an overnight success. And the truth is that it never is that way. It only appears that way because you never heard about it. And then you heard about it. It's like they were overnight success. But when you talk to the people, it's like that was 10 years in the making. Um, so that I would say that's the biggest thing is just focus and not giving up. It's just that's like really with that you can make it a lot further. And I think that was my big issue with the other businesses I had was that I didn't give it enough time.
So when you say focus too, so you're not saying like a new product. You're thinking like even just I mean you're singularly focused on selling Flipstik. Like that's all you do.
Yes.
And when do you feel like is the right time then to start branching out? Like, have you gotten
Mhm.
to that point now where you're thinking like, hey, I think we're close to seeing like expanding, or you're still kind of like, no way, got to stay focused?
I think right now for us it's still just a singular focus. I look a lot of times at Amazon. Amazon only sold books for a, a decade. That's all they sold, and then they got to a point where enough people knew about them that if they were to launch something new, they had a base of people that would try it and use it and get feedback from. And I think when you get to that point where you have a loyal base that will receive whatever it is you put out and give it a try, I think that's the moment when it's like, okay, it's time to do the next thing. And that's what I found from a lot of, you know, different companies that I follow. Another company that I really admire is the Virgin Group, Richard Branson. For a long time, it was just music. Like that was all they did. It was just Virgin Music. They had their record shops, and then they branched into producing music. But they didn't venture into airlines and lifestyle brands. For 10 years. And it was once they had that customer loyalty that they started reaching out. And I think you see that for pretty much everyone, whether it be Facebook or Google or Microsoft. It's like you focus on your core competencies until you really have that traction. And I don't think we're quite there yet. Maybe in about a year, I think we'll be at that point because things are starting to accelerate. As you mentioned, we've done some pretty big pitches recently. But no, yeah, that to me is the big thing. It's not just focusing on your business, but focusing on what you're really good at in your business.
Yeah. So focus and then like discipline to just keep that focus going, even when you're like
Yes, it is
itching.
hard.
I can
It's
imagine.
hard.
I believe it. It's that pulls at me too. And I think it's a thing that I think entrepreneurs struggle with in general because you're creative people, you see opportunity everywhere.
And you have the exactly. You have the idea, and you're like, ah. It's like, no, just keep it,
Just
keep it
put
tight.
it in the Google Doc and file it away until you're
Exactly,
successful enough
exactly.
to look at it again. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So before we turn it over to some Q&A, I did want to make sure we address this too. So you did the pitch with Snoop and Diddy, and then you also were released recently on Shark Tank. But there's some funny stuff that happened with the Shark Tank thing. But before we get into that, how did you get onto Shark Tank? What was the process to get to that point?
Yeah. So there's a lot I can't say, but what I will say is that it actually goes back to the Diddy thing again, right? Where it's like one of the judges who I didn't get to pitch to at the pitch competition, was actually a casting director for Shark Tank. And I ended up meeting him at that event after I got on stage and stuff, and we had just talked. He got his phone number and everything. So February of this year, I get a text and it's like, hey, I'm in Kansas City tomorrow with the Shark Tank casting team. Come pitch. And I literally got in the car and drove to Kansas City overnight and pitched to them that morning in Kansas City. And that's really kind of where it all began. And for people that have seen the episode, or for those who are going to go look at it, you'll notice I come out with a rap. And the reason I come out with a rap is because they love the Diddy story too. And they're like, well, we want you to rap to the Sharks. So it all kind of came, as crazy as that idea was, it all keeps funneling back to that one decision to say, hey, I'm going to just invest this $500 into this ticket to something that may not make any sense. And literally now I was on Shark Tank, from that one moment. So it's super exciting getting on the Shark Tank. It was a long process just due to COVID. It's generally a long process, but it was even longer with COVID. But it was just an incredible experience. I tell people that about 3 days after I pitched to the Sharks, I jumped out of a plane for the first time. It was skydiving. And jumping out the plane, I always thought would be one of the scariest things I ever do. Literally less than half as scary as standing there waiting for the doors to open, getting ready to go into the tank. That was by far the scariest thing I've ever done.
So you drove the next day to go to do the pitch. How did you prepare for the pitch? By this time, are you just like an expert at pitching, or were you like practicing on the drive down? How did you get ready for that?
I mean, this time, I hadn't done any pitch competition. So, this is before Arch Grants or anything like that. But, we were in the mall. And look, the St. Louis consumer is a tough person to pitch to. So when you're pitching to them constantly, trying to get them to spend their $20 that they, spent 3 hours earning, that is the best training for pitching your business to anyone. And we had won a pitch competition at CES, and I've always been a talker. I used to work for a big communications company, and I was like the number one pitch person in this Fortune 500 company. I was the number one pitch person and won all these competitions, trying to sell their product. So it wasn't something that's completely foreign to me, but I pretty much knew what I was going to say. It looked nothing like, it was not nearly as polished as what you saw on Shark Tank. But no, yeah. Look, pitching to people in the mall, in the Galleria Mall, was plenty of practice.
That's probably just as tough to sell as a shark. Do you so do you have any what's your one tip or anything about pitching, whether it's the prep or the way you've set it up? Anything for aspiring entrepreneurs to learn from?
Yeah, I would say that one thing that I had given to a quote, we won an American Express pitch competition early this year, and they asked for a quote. And what I said was, I was like, to me, a pitch is like a movie trailer for your business, right? You have to pack all of the action and the drama of 2 hours into, 1 minute. Like that's your goal. And honestly, sometimes the trailer is better than the movie. Like, it's more action packed, it's more fun than the movie actually is. But that's what you have to get into your pitch. And the other big thing is that is not everyone's strong suit. Sometimes the person that comes up with the business, the person that runs the business, they're just not a pitch person. And if you know that that's you, instead of trying to force yourself into a box that doesn't really work for you, is to find someone who is that salesperson that can get that done. Because I feel like in today's world, we have a lot of startups that they're ideas, but there's no sales. There's no revenue coming in. And for a business like ours, if there's no revenue, there's no business. So having that person that is like sales oriented, that can get the message across quickly and make people excited about it, that's huge. That's huge for any business. And it's not always going to be the person that founds the company.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, Akeem, thank you so much. We're going to end the live stream now. And for those of you who joined through the Zoom, through the Venture Cafe website, we're going to turn it over for a quick Q&A. So I'm going to turn this off. Thanks for everyone watching on live stream.